Hey everyone, this is Neil with a little sort of supporting reference material for the data project number one. I'm asking you in most, or if not all of these cases, to build a container and to share that image with us. But in some cases, you may also want to publish your container as an API up to a cloud service. So I want to cover the mechanics of that. I don't want you to be hung up on exactly the little details, because that's not really a thing to grade you on, whether you remember them all perfectly or not. So this is just a little refresher about how to use a repository that you have with a working Docker file, how you build that container, how you push it up to Docker Hub, and then how you can use that published public image and launch it in something, a cloud service like Lightsail or Kubernetes and so on. So let's take those in order. This shouldn't take too long, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes total, to have a published API working. So what I have here is our Fast API repository from a few weeks ago. This is where we were working on an assignment and we had a few different tasks. You can see there's already a Docker file here with just 4 lines in it. It's from a pre-built Alpine container. It copies in our app folder, copies in our requirements.txt, and then it runs pip. Awesome. Okay. Here's the requirements.txt. It's got requests and Fast API and Bodo and so on. And then in the app folder, it's got a main.py, and that's what the Docker file is looking for. It's looking for a folder named app, and within that, a file named main.py. And in fact, it's looking for an instantiation of Fast API, which is called app. So all that's neither here nor there. What I want you to be able to do is, once you get this thing buildable and working, and it's just working fine locally, then how do we build it and push it and deploy it? So remember the syntax: Docker build, and then a -t. And then I need either a Docker username or a Docker organization name. So I'm going to use my personal username, McGee. I could just as well, if I worked for Google, I could say Google blah, 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 or I could say, UVA Research Computing. But in this case, I'm going to say McGee, and I'm going to say Fast API. Now I can tag it. I can say version 17. I can say, Apple's, whatever. I could say latest, but I can also leave off any tag, and that would imply latest. Okay, so no tag right now. I'm in the same folder as my Docker file, and I need that. And now I need to put a period, a space and then a period. I'm going to build this thing. It builds really quickly. And we can see now, if I look locally, Docker images, I can see here is the McGee Fast API container image. And it's 186 megs. So awesome, I've got that copied now. And so I can now say Docker push McGee Fast API. So it's simple, Docker push this account name, this container name, and again, I could say latest if I want to. It's going to push this whole thing up there. It's not very large. You can see these layers, all the different layers it has. It's related to another container that I've built, that I was building in another account. And now it's done. And if I switch over to the repositories of my own account in Docker Hub, and I refresh it, here we go, McGee Fast API. And I'm in my management page here where I can push to it this way, but I can also go to the public view and I'll see there's the little Docker pull command. I can copy from here. So I could now share this with the world. I could add some documentation in here. Here's how to run this container. Here's details about it, so on. Here's my GitHub repository, blah, blah, blah. What I want is just, again, the account name / container service name. And I'm going to launch this into Amazon Lightsail now. So Lightsail was a lab from a few weeks ago. Some of you did. It's just a way to run a container up in the cloud independently, so that you have a web API or a website or some other sort of container up and running independently of your computer. So if you come to the management console and you look up Lightsail, this is one of those services that's just made to ease the learning curve. This is made to this is sort of a no-brainer service, nothing fancy here at all. You can do some fancy options, but this is to sort of help people who are new to the concept. So good evening. Oh, that's nice of you. So I could run instances and containers and databases and so on. I'm going to go to containers. I don't have any running right now, so that's fine. I want to create one. All the settings by default are fine. I don't want a smaller container because that's going to cost me. I don't want a small container that'll cost me a little bit more. I want this micro that was pre-selected because that gives me 3 months for free. So let's leave that as it was. And now we need to set up our first deployment. And that just means give them a container and define what it should do when it runs. They have some pre-built ones. I don't want those. Those are examples. I want a custom deployment. And so container name, I could name this anything. Let's name it apples. And now I need to give them an image name, and I'm going to paste that in. Any McGee Fast API. Again, I could use a tag if I want, but no need to. And then finally, if I needed to send a command, if it needs a specific command when it's launched, I could put one here. It might be useful for some of you, given different data products. If you need to pass in certain keys or things like that, here's how you could do that. Or if you needed a token, you could pass that in that way. This way, these values, these very valuable sort of credentials, aren't baked into the container itself. They're passed in only when you're running it. So hint, hint, this may be useful to you. I'm going to get rid of them for now. One important thing we do need to do is to add a port. And we know that our container is going to run on port 80, so we want to use that. We want to map to port 80, and we can just leave the protocol alone. Okay, so we've defined a container, apples, and now the last thing we need is it says which container is going to be a public endpoint. Well, we want the one we just created to be a public endpoint. And it's going to run a little health check that just sees if the container is happy or not. So that's all good. We can identify our service. We can leave that default name just fine, and then we want to create it. And you're basically going to see this thing building over the next maybe 5 minutes, and I'll pause the video and kind of fast forward us through time here a little bit. There's 7 steps. You'll see it finish in about 5 minutes. So let's come back in just a second. Okay, so we're back. That took, in this particular case, took about 3.5 minutes. I can tell that it's running by the status here. I can see that I have a micro. It's running in Virginia. I've got one node, and here's the memory and CPU and so on. So it gives me some things I can change. I can add other deployment versions and so on. But what's nice is that I now have a public domain. I have a public endpoint. So I can click into this, and I get my main py file. And I can do all the normal operations, which you may remember from a couple of weeks ago. I've got my add endpoint. I can say add 130 and 170, and there we go. I can look at my docs, and it's published, all of my endpoints and methods. So that's great. So I can work with it, and this is how I can sort of do a proof of concept. Now for the data project, if we've asked you to publish an API, or if that's your option, you want to leave this up and running, okay, until we get a chance to grade it. It's only going to take a few days to kind of grade everything. So just leave it up and running. And when it's time, you'll want to come back to your container service and delete it. And so the way you do that, by the way, you can look at metrics and you can see when people have visited. You can see what sort of traffic you've gotten. But when you're ready to get rid of it and it's time to delete, you could either click on disable, or you can go to these 3 dots and you can just delete it. And this will delete not your container image, but it will delete the running container that they have in Amazon. So yes, delete that. It takes a few minutes to go away, but that's it. You've now stopped any charges that are being incurred. But again, we get 3 months for free at this size. So that's all good. And I think that's it. This is how you use, how you build a container, push it to Docker Hub, and launch it as a service in Amazon Lightsail.